This idea of once a sex offender, always a sex offender, it's just not factual.
New tonight, once an offender, always an offender? Katu is on your side with part 3 of a special investigative series on sex offenders in Oregon. The question we're asking tonight, can people convicted of sex crimes change? Experts argue that with the right tools, the answer is yes. But as K2 investigator Wright Gazaway learned, Oregon doesn't offer all of those tools.
There are two things after punishment experts say can prevent people from reoffending: treatment and supervision. However, our investigation found Oregon is one of several states that does not provide sex abuse treatment in prison.
Justice is punishment, but it is also rehabilitation and reintegration reformation.
People like Katie Gotch say the state could do more to help people convicted of sex crimes change their ways. She's a certified clinical sexual offense therapist. A lot of people are going to hear treatment for sex crimes and they're going to think, what is that? How do you explain to somebody who doesn't know anything about what it looks like?
And so the kind of interventions we do are cognitive behavioral, relational, dialectical behavioral therapy, arousal, reconditioning work as part of sexual offense-specific treatment. Those programs have been shown to reduce sexual recidivism by about 1/3 in those versus when compared to individuals who did not complete treatment.
In other words, people who receive proper treatment are less likely to reoffend. However, Katie says Oregon falls behind in treatment because it doesn't offer the programs inside its prisons. It's one of roughly a dozen states not doing so.
And there are sexual predators out there who've never been caught and never been convicted.
Oregon Republican Representative Kevin Mannix has repeatedly sponsored legislation at the state capitol targeting Oregon's sex offender laws. Would you like to see the Department of Corrections offer that kind of service in its facilities?
Yes, because all of these offenders are going to be released at some point, and if we're not offering treatment, we're failing to give them an opportunity to move on another path. When people are in prison in this state, they're in prison because we're trying to prevent them from hurting other people, continuing to commit their crimes. We're also holding them accountable, and the amount of time that they're incarcerated should be time that we try to straighten them out and move them in the best direction for the future.
Supervision is the other part of getting people to change. That's the period after prison or during probation. It's required as part of their sentence. As we've reported, offenders report to a probation or post-prison supervision officer who determines things like where they can live and where they can work. The intensity of supervision depends on the crime and the person's specific risks to commit another one. Supervision eventually ends for almost every person convicted of a sex crime. That's why it's critical to change behavior before that happens. Nate Gowieran is the director of Washington County's Department of Community Corrections. The layperson, a lot of people might not really believe that sex offenders can change. And they feel like once someone exhibits that behavior, that's what they are. What does your experience and professional experience tell you?
This is what I have experienced through my profession, is that the sexual deviant patterns of behavior that people are into and what they are attracted to is very difficult to change. What they can change is how they respond to that.
K2 Investigates dug into the data to see how often people are rearrested for new sex crimes. The Criminal Justice Commission recently looked at the 3-year recidivism rate for nearly 22,000 sex offenders. It found just under 2%, or roughly 400 people, were convicted of a new sex crime within 3 years of getting out of prison or off probation. The highest rate was among level 3 offenders, the highest risk in Oregon. Compare that to the Commission's most recent general recidivism report. It looked at everyone getting out of prison or off probation. It found the conviction rate was roughly 30% within 3 years, much higher than the rate for new sex crimes. But that data may do little to change the public's perception. There's a segment of people who just fundamentally believe that people who commit sex crimes cannot be rehabilitated. How do you respond when people have that position?
I come from the viewpoint that everyone can change. If our goal is prevention of sexual violence, utilizing our limited funds to achieve that in a more meaningful way requires some really hard conversations and hard decisions.
Decisions and conversations that experts say get lost in the chaos of a busy state capitol. Our investigation also learned offenders in rural counties could have a tougher time getting treatment. In part, there are fewer providers in rural counties, but also because offenders are required to pay for their own treatment. Katie says urban counties often have more resources to help people who cannot afford it compared to rural counties. Right, Gazaway, K2 News.
And we reached out to the Oregon Department of Corrections to find out why they don't offer sex offender-specific treatment inside its prisons. The agency told us in part, quote, bringing in outside certified clinical sexual offense therapists into our 12 institutions across the state requires significant budgetary and operational resources. They say that they are, quote, looking into other effective rehabilitation strategies grounded in research that have proven long-term public safety outcomes, but currently have not identified a suitable approach for our system. They tell us K2 that they work with counties to ensure that probation and parole officers understand offenders' risk to the public upon release, so those counties can provide proper supervision. You can read their full statement right now on K2.com. And this story is just one piece of a 3-part investigative series on Oregon's sex offender population. Learn more about registered sex offenders in your neighborhood, how they're supervised, and more by scanning the QR code on your screen and visiting the K2 News YouTube page. And be sure to let us know if there's something happening in your community that you would like investigated. Just call our tip line at 503-231-4205. Again, it's 503-231-4205.